Hey folks, so this is going to be a lecture on the process of testing your app, the things that you can do to kind of prepare yourself in the form of questions, in what you want to be asking your testers, and the other end of that as well, reciprocating the people that you'll be testing with your own feedback for their games, and making sure that you give them kind of valid and substantive feedback. Okay, so to give you some context on where we're at in terms of the academic year. So for this first semester, we're approaching the halfway point with just 7 weeks to go till you submit your projects. I would say at this point, or at the very least for next week, you should have a functional game by this point. If you think back to week one, I suggested that you build a game that you could construct in 1 week. The intention is for you to have something that is functional and playable at this point, and then from here you can iterate and refine the design that you have. You shouldn't be doing much in terms of development past this point. And what I mean by that is, like, you should have your concept solidified, and be in the actual process of building the game and having something playable. This next section is kind of meant to be about refining the product and making sure it's something that you could feasibly sell. And yeah, remember that, like, rushing this for the last minute and just getting something that's deliverable for the last minute will not only damage your grade in that I won't have seen it in a functional format, but also you need time to playtest it, see how people cope with your mechanisms. You've obviously spent a tremendous amount of time with your projects, so you need to make sure that there's not any blind spots that you've missed. Other than that, you should also make sure your game can run on Android, that you have either the ability to run through an emulator or via an APK. And just to kind of go through that again, just kind of really hammer that home. Everyone needs to be testing their game next week. This is, I would say a deal breaker. Even if you have something that's maybe a bit janky, or you're not 100% happy with, having something to playtest next week, is something I'm expecting to see, if I haven't, for example, seen your product up till this point. And then from here on out, we're going to be getting more kind of regular testing done on a week-to-week basis. And as one thing I would say is that, like, as I said before, like, you need to make sure that you're playtesting this sooner rather than later, because stuff that seems inherent to you may be more obscure to a potential customer. So please do make sure that you engage with this playtesting next week. So in terms of an actual checklist for your game, and this is, to clarify, this is like bare minimum in terms of deliverables for next week. This is not, obviously if you go beyond this, this is not exhausted. I don't know what the term is, an exhaustive list. This is just the kind of bare minimum suggestions. Obviously, I would hope if you're looking for a good grade, you'd go beyond this. So, does it work on Android, and can it be operated without just using keyboard and mouse? Have you acclimatized the controls for a mobile device? Is there some kind of indicator of how to play, or am I going to have to talk to you about how to play it? At this point, obviously, I've mentioned before that help, what they're called, how to play and help screens are kind of suboptimal. Obviously, at this point in testing, I'm kind of fine with you yeah, relying on those a little bit more. I don't mind. Obviously, in the preceding lectures, we're going to go into tutorial design. So, just getting a first iteration of your tutorial would be good. And is there like a playable game loop that is repeatable? When you lose, do you go to like some kind of end state that you can then repeat from, or does your game just stop and you have to reset the app to be able to play through it again? Make sure that it can be repeated relatively quickly. And yeah, other than that, making sure that you've got something that is stable and runs at a reasonable frame rate, is something good to be aiming for this early on. So with that in mind, if you haven't gone through the process yet, I would hope you have. But regardless, it's worth going to the build settings and making sure to export your game as an APK. If you go back to the week 3 documentation, that gives you kind of a rundown of like how to get your game exported, and making sure that you have an APK to play test is really important. Next, we'll be kind of going into the kind of questions that you want to be asking and how to make best use of the playtesting session. So to begin with, the first thing is there's I like to think of it like a lattice grid of questions to ask. So actually no, sorry, this is for feedback. I'll talk about it in a bit. But basically, like if you can give like a really you can give like really vague questions, and what you'll get is really vague answers. Maybe they'll kind of expand a little bit further and give you more feedback, but you should try to be incisive with your feedback to kind of get something useful and substantial out of it. If you look on what I've had for my questions that I tested for, you can see that these are all very specific things that I'm asking in terms of the play testing. To be fair, there is nothing wrong with giving people like an outlet to talk about that stuff, but usually when I've done things like, is the game good? Usually the answer is something like yes, or yes, smiley face, or yes, it's great. You don't tend to get much useful out of that. A good one that I always chuck on the end when I'm doing lists for playtesting is just asking for feedback or suggestions. Just to kind of encourage them to actually engage and actually give you unique feedback beyond just the questions. And when it comes to feedback, this advice is kind of more oriented to in-person testing, but I think it's useful for you to know now for when things go back to normal. But when you're viewing someone playtesting your game, you want to try and be as reserved as you can. This is, again, kind of a bit of absolutist language, but try to be in the background, ready to help if is absolutely crucial. But for the most part, think of this as being able to kind of view into someone's living room as they're sitting and playing your game in, I don't know, Illinois, or I don't know, Melbourne, or somewhere, anywhere in the world, and just be able to kind of see how they would respond to that. And for those people that are like international playing your game, the point is that you won't be able to direct them or verbally say anything to kind of help them along. The only way that you're going to be able to help them in that way is through what you put in the game. So if you have someone that's willing to sit down and play test with you, try to let them follow the UX and the UI that you've designed, and only really if they're starting to get completely stuck. And what I mean by that is they've tried to attempt something multiple times or are looking like they're on the verge of quitting, then kind of intervene and try and help them. But don't from the offset kind of coddle them and give them a rundown of how it works. Let the game do the talking on that front. And yeah, remember that this is like the kind of one of the best opportunities that you will get to get feedback. Realistically, I'm going to encourage you to kind of post your APKs in the Discord and share your stuff, but this is like a tangible, defined opportunity for you to get feedback for your project. So do try and take advantage of this. So in terms of feedback, so the other end of things, going back to that thing I was talking about before, I don't know if I can make... No, unfortunately, I can't do illustrations on this. Let me... In fact, I'll just bob up paint. I'll bob up basic, right? Okay, yeah, you tend to get like a bit of like a grid when it comes to feedback. So there's like kind of four different types. So you get good. Oh, that's a terrible text. Let me try 24. I'll have to do. There's good, bad. So kind of positive and negative feedback, and then like I can't write it down here. Or maybe, yeah, I'll tell you what. Let's make this a bit wider. In hindsight, I should have got a graph for this, but I just thought of it kind of destructive. And constructive. So, if we, with this, if I just bump this up in size to make it a bunch bigger. So, if we look at this intersection here, you've got positive constructive feedback. So that would be something like, kind of giving them like recommendations on how to structure the game. Bad. I can't give specific examples of that. Maybe it's stuff like, let's move this over into PowerPoint just in a slide, just so this is a bit easier to handle. Let's create an end slide on here. So if I zoom, whoop. So cool. So let's start with the top right. So destructive bad feedback would be something like, I hate it, hate this game, it sucks, quit being a games designer. Something like that. So not very useful and kind of not giving any tangible advice or suggestions specifically, just kind of being horrible. Obviously, you probably won't get anything as extreme as this, but that's kind of not great. So then you've got the other one, this is kind of, I wouldn't say destructive is the right term, but I think this can be obviously it can be good for motivation, but I think this is kind of as useless. So this is like, this game is great. I love it. Keep going. Like that's useful in terms of motivation, but it's not actually useful in terms of feedback. And then when you have the other stuff, you've got constructive, positive feedback. So, you could have some really detailed stuff. So things like I really loved how the the UI was responsive to my inputs on the menu. Could do with some theme options, something like that. Yeah, so like that's kind of like talking about features that are already existing in the game, and giving you kind of positive reinforcement towards those. You could give some feedback that's constructive and but negative. So you could talk about the controls didn't feel great. I think there needs to be a bit more tightness on the jump arc. Something like that. So it's each of these have kind of got a little bit of difference to them. These top two are useless most of the time. You probably want to be getting either positive constructive feedback or negative constructive feedback. So let's carry on with this. So, as part of that, abide by Wheaton's law. This is a good rule to kind of keep in mind throughout your careers, not just in terms of giving feedback, but don't be a dick. Remember that this industry is quite small. So, if you're trashing someone's game when you're giving them feedback, not only will they probably reciprocate that when they test your game, but also, you don't want to get a reputation for, trashing people's games. Yeah, the whole don't throw a stone to when you live in glass houses things. I'm sure you wouldn't appreciate your work being trashed. Yeah, and then on top of that as well, if you're having the discussions, try to make notes as you're going through. What I usually do when I play test my games is I'll as I'm kind of gathering feedback from people, I'll make notes, and then at the end of the feedback session, I'll kind of give a summary of like what we've talked about. So I'll be like, we talked about the controls, we talked about the UI needing a little bit of refining, we talked about how the tutorial wasn't sufficient. And I'll kind of give like a rundown of everything we've talked to, and then just ask, is there anything that I've missed? And then that way you don't just kind of get kind of caught up in the conversation and have key things being missed. One option is to get recorded feedback through voice. I think you should be able to manage without that, but that can be useful if you're just wanting to kind of focus on them as a player when they're playing your game. You can see on the right hand side here that there is pretty meticulous feedback here. This is all pretty constructive feedback. So use things like this as a good point of reference for your feedback writing. Obviously, this is pretty dense. You might not need to go to that extent, but just a good point of reference. In terms of feedback beyond this session, I am happy to give you feedback beyond this point, but keep in mind that as I play test your games more, my feedback will become less and less useful in time, because inevitably, I'm going to become more accustomed to the controls, getting the gist of how to play it, and as a result, you're not going to be able to rely on me as like a accurate representation of a customer. And in general, you shouldn't consider me as an accurate representation of a customer anyway, because I'm someone that is quite well accustomed with games. I know how things work, and I'm quite swatted up on hyper casual stuff and how these things are put together. So what you want realistically is to test with people outside of games, kind of conventional kind of gamers and people that like playing video games. The people that you want to be playtesting with realistically is people that would be like commuting, maybe playing the phone on the toilet or at a bus stop or you know, on a plane. Well, well, maybe not on a plane because you'd probably not want them to be a. Yeah, but you know what I mean. Like it's not your kind of standard games audience. So trying to kind of get this in the hands of people that aren't on the course, for example, is a really big one. Using people only on the course as a reference for your playtesting groups is a really easy way, even just in conventional games, to skew your tutorials and your product towards gaming audiences rather than considering the wider market. And you know, beyond that, make sure that you do try and keep testing your games beyond the playtests next week. You know, there's opportunity in the Discord to post your APKs. I don't know if you can post the files directly, but if you can link them via a Google Drive or something like that. And I'm sure people will indulge playtesting them. Yeah, so that's kind of everything that I wanted to go with. Obviously, you know, in normal times you'd have Cambridge Game Devs to playtest it, but that hasn't been active for a while. Having said that, though, you know, I'm happy to put out a request to see if there's anyone who would be interested in playtesting these games. Yeah, let us know if you're interested in that. Yeah, so other than that, feel free to kind of contact me if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you games next week.